Open with the courage it takes to share painful truths. Introduce yourself briefly and explain why you're telling this story now, perhaps to heal, inspire, or help others. I never thought I'd be standing here today telling this story, not because it's hard to talk about, although it is, but because for the longest time I didn't believe anyone would want to listen. For years, I carried the weight of silence. It felt safer that way, easier, like if I didn't give it words, it wouldn't be real. But pain doesn't disappear just because you pretend it isn't there. It lives in your body, in your bones, in the way you flinch when someone raises their voice or touches your shoulder unexpectedly. It becomes part of you whether you acknowledge it or not. So today I speak, not because it's easy but because it's necessary. Necessary for healing, for truth, and maybe, hopefully, for someone out there who needs to know they're not alone. I was just a little girl. The kind of child who believed in fairy tales and birthday candles. Who laughed loudly, sang badly, and loved deeply. But that version of me didn't last long. Something happened that changed everything, something no child should ever have to experience, something I didn't even have the language for at the time. You see, when people hear the word grandpa, they often picture warmth, stories told by the fireplace, candies in coat pockets, soft hands that guide with love. I wish that had been my story. I wish I could tell you about kindness and laughter, about bedtime stories and protection. But instead, my earliest memories are of fear, of confusion, of a man I was supposed to trust becoming the source of my pain. I remember being small and not understanding why certain touches felt wrong. I remember my body stiffening, my mind trying to leave the room while I was still physically there. And I remember the pain, sharp, confusing, violating, and the screams that got caught in my throat because I thought making noise would make things worse. I didn't have the words to describe what was happening to me. I just knew it hurt and I wanted it to stop. And yet I stayed quiet. Because that's what children do when they're scared. Because he told me not to tell. Because when you're a child and someone older, someone who says they love you, hurts you, you blame yourself. You think, maybe I did something wrong. That shame is so heavy. It's like dragging chains behind you every single day. I didn't tell anyone. Not at first. Not even my grandmother. And that's a part that still haunts me in some ways. She was always there. Folding laundry, making soup, humming to herself while she worked. She was a gentle soul, and I wanted to believe she'd save me. But either she didn't see what was happening, or she couldn't face it. And that silence, hers, mine, created a space where the abuse could thrive, where my pain could echo unanswered. Years passed and I learned how to hide. I learned how to smile on command, how to keep my grades up, how to act like everything was fine. But inside I was breaking. The screams I couldn't let out back then found other ways to escape. Through nightmares, anxiety, anger, fear of being touched. I lost trust in adults. I lost trust in myself. I doubted my worth, my sanity, my voice. But something changed over time. Not all at once, not like a movie moment where everything shifts in a single scene. It was slower than that. It started with tiny sparks. Like the first time I whispered the truth to a friend and they didn't look away. The first time I admitted to myself that I hadn't deserved what happened. The first time I said his name and didn't feel like I was going to crumble. And it led me here, to this moment. Speaking aloud what once lived only in the shadows. Not for revenge. Not even just for justice. But for freedom. For truth. For the little girl inside me who deserved to be believed, protected, and loved. This isn't the whole story. It's just the beginning. People used to say my grandparents' house was beautiful. It sat on the corner of a quiet street, white with blue shutters, flowers blooming neatly along the front porch. To the outside world, it looked like the kind of home where good things happened, where kids played in the yard and cookies baked in the oven. And maybe that's part of what made everything so hard to talk about. Because from the outside, everything seemed perfect. But behind those walls, behind the locked doors and drawn curtains, was a different world entirely. A world I was trapped in. A world built on fear. It's strange, isn't it? How appearances can lie so convincingly. People would smile and wave at my grandfather in the yard. Call him a good man. Lucky girl, they'd say to me, as if I'd won something by living there. And I would smile too because I didn't know how to say, This man hurts me. I didn't know how to answer their kindness with my truth. I didn't even know if they'd believe me if I tried. My grandfather had a way of moving through life that made people respect him. He was charming when he needed to be, helpful in public, always willing to lend a hand to neighbors. He wore his good man mask like a second skin, but it would come off the moment that front door closed. That's when the air changed. That's when the real man emerged. He controlled everything: what I wore, how I spoke, how I moved. There were rules for everything, and breaking them, or even just being in the wrong place at the wrong time, meant punishment. Not discipline. Not correction. Abuse. Sometimes it was physical. Sometimes it was words, sharp and poisonous, meant to slice away at my spirit. And sometimes it was worse. I tried to shrink myself, make myself invisible. If I was quiet enough, maybe he'd forget I was there. If I walked on eggshells perfectly, maybe I could avoid setting him off. But it never worked, because it was never really about me. It was about control, about power. And I was the easiest target. I remember lying in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, afraid to breathe too loudly. Every creak in the floorboards sent a jolt through my body. I'd pray, though I didn't know what to believe in then, that he'd fall asleep early, that he'd leave me alone, that I could just make it to morning. And yet, no one outside our home seemed to notice. No one asked why I always looked so tired, why I flinched when someone raised their hand too fast, why I avoided being alone with him. I was a master at pretending. Had to be. Because pretending was safer than the alternative. Even my grandmother, who was always nearby, didn't, or couldn't, see it. I still don't know which it was. Maybe she saw glimpses. Maybe she saw more than she ever let on. But she didn't stop him. She didn't protect me. And for a long time I resented her for that. I wanted her to be the hero. I wanted her to barge into the room and say, "No more." But she never did. Sometimes I wonder if she was afraid too. I wonder if he hurt her when no one was looking, the same way he hurt me. I wonder if she was so used to the pain that she forgot what it meant to fight back. I don't have those answers. All I have are memories, some clear, some blurred by time, and the ache of what could have been. It's easy for people to ask, "Why didn't you tell someone?" But when you grow up in a world built on fear, silence becomes your survival. I didn't have the words. I didn't have the power. And deep down, I didn't think anyone would believe a scared little girl over a man everyone respected. That's the cruelest part of it. Abusers don't just hurt you in the moment, they take away your sense of safety in the world. They make you doubt your own voice. But even then, in that place of pain, a part of me held on. A part of me whispered, "This isn't how it's supposed to be." I didn't know how or when, but I knew I wanted to escape. I wanted something more than just surviving. I wanted peace. I wanted to feel safe in my own skin. I wanted to breathe without fear. And that quiet voice inside me, the one he tried so hard to silence, it never fully died. It stayed with me, growing stronger with every year, until one day, I was ready to speak. People often ask me about my grandmother. They hear about the abuse, about the things my grandfather did, and the next question is always the same. Where was she? Didn't she know? It's a fair question. One I've asked myself more times than I can count. The truth is, she was there. She was always there. Folding towels, stirring soup, humming hymns to herself as if the house wasn't filled with the sound of my fear. As if she didn't hear the shifts in my breathing or the silence that followed my screams, when I was too scared to cry out loud. She wasn't a bad person. She wasn't cruel or cold. In many ways she was kind, gentle even. Her touch was soft, and her voice never rose. But she lived in her own silence, a silence that wrapped around her like armor. Whether that silence was born out of fear or resignation, I still don't fully know. What I do know is that she was part of that house, part of the rhythm of it, part of the look the other way routine that kept everything appearing normal on the outside. When I think about her now, I try to look past the questions and see the whole woman. I remember how she'd call me "darlin'" in the mornings, how she'd braid my hair so carefully it never once pulled. I remember her cinnamon tea, her stories about her younger days, The way she'd keep old photographs in a shoebox like they were sacred. These moments were real. But so was the look in her eyes when I would flinch and she'd pretend not to notice. So was her silence when he walked into the room and the light in her face disappeared. There were times, small moments, when I thought she might speak up. I'd catch her looking at me just a little too long, like she was seeing something she didn't want to admit. There was once, just once, when I was maybe 10 or 11, and he had been especially cruel. I came into the kitchen with red eyes and shaking hands. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't say a word. But she placed a warm washcloth in my hand and told me to go lie down. That was her version of love, I think. Quiet, scared, broken. Part of me used to hate her for not saving me. That was the loudest feeling I carried for a long time. Anger, resentment, that desperate cry inside me that asked, "Why didn't you do something? Anything?" But another part of me, the part that softened with time and perspective, wonders if she was also surviving. If she, too, had been a victim long before I ever came along. Maybe she thought silence was the only way to stay alive. Maybe she thought that by saying nothing, she was protecting what little peace she had left. But silence isn't protection. It's a prison. And it doesn't just trap you, it traps everyone around you. I lived in that prison with her. Both of us moving through the same house, speaking around the truth. Her silence didn't shield me. It left me exposed. It taught me that pain was something to be endured quietly, that love meant keeping secrets, that family meant pretending. It's complicated. Loving someone who didn't protect you. Mourning someone who stood by while you suffered. I wish I could tell you that by the time she passed we had talked about it, that she had apologized, that I had forgiven. But that moment never came. We never had that conversation. She left this world with so many words unspoken, and I'm still learning how to carry that. But even without those words, I've made peace with parts of her. Not because what she did or didn't do was okay, but because I needed to. Because carrying the weight of her silence alongside the weight of what he did was too heavy. I had to let something go. And I chose to believe that somewhere inside her, the part that braided my hair and made me tea wanted to protect me but didn't know how. It's not easy to talk about. People want clear answers, clear villains and heroes. But life isn't like that. Sometimes the people who fail us are the ones we love most. Sometimes the people who should have been our refuge become part of the story we have to survive. So when I speak about my grandmother, I speak with honesty. She didn't hurt me the way he did, but her silence hurt in a different way. And yet I still loved her. I still love her. That's the ache of it. That's the part that lingers. It's hard to explain what abuse does to a person, not just in the moment but over time. People often imagine bruises, marks, visible wounds. But the truth is, the deepest damage can't be seen. It lives inside. It reshapes the way you think, the way you breathe, the way you move through the world. For me it started with fear, but it didn't end there. It became shame. It became confusion. It became this heavy, aching silence that followed me into every part of my life. I don't think I fully understood what was happening to me when I was little. I just knew it felt wrong. I knew I didn't want to be touched. I didn't want to be near him. I didn't want to be alone. And yet it kept happening. The pain wasn't always sharp. Sometimes it was dull and lingering, a sick feeling that lived in my stomach like it had built a home there. I remember the physical pain, yes. But more than that, I remember how it made me feel afterward. Dirty, confused, like something was broken in me that couldn't be fixed. I carried that with me every day. It showed up in ways I couldn't always name. I had stomach aches that no doctor could explain. I stopped sleeping through the night. I flinched when people touched me, even if it was just a hand on my shoulder. I felt like my body wasn't mine anymore. It was something I had to guard, something I had to hide. I started dressing in baggy clothes, avoiding mirrors, avoiding people. I didn't want anyone to look at me because in my mind, I thought they would somehow see what had been done to me, that they would see I was damaged. And that shame, that quiet, poisonous shame, followed me everywhere. It told me I wasn't worth protecting, told me I was weak, told me that maybe I deserved it. That voice stayed with me into adolescence, into adulthood. shaped how I saw myself, how I let people treat me. I became someone who apologized for existing. Someone who didn't speak up, didn't push back, didn't ask for help, even when I needed it most. I remember being a teenager, sitting in classrooms full of other kids laughing and whispering, and feeling like I was on the outside of something I didn't know how to join. I didn't know how to be normal. I didn't know how to trust. Relationships, friendships, they were all hard. Because how could I let anyone get close to me when I didn't even feel safe inside my own skin? The emotional toll wasn't just sadness or fear. It was a constant sense of being wrong. Like I was too much and not enough at the same time. Too broken. Too quiet. Too guarded. Not lovable. Not whole. I smiled when I needed to. Played the part. But inside I was screaming. I was still that child, hurt, afraid, frozen. And it wasn't just the abuse itself. It was the aftermath. It was watching people celebrate my grandfather at church. Hearing him praised for his kindness, his work ethic, his wisdom. It was being hugged by neighbors who told me I was lucky to have such a strong family. It was sitting at dinner with the very person who had hurt me and being expected to pass the salt like nothing had ever happened. That does something to a person. It makes you question your reality. It makes you wonder if what you remember is even true. Because how could someone so loved by others be so cruel behind closed doors? It messes with your mind, makes you feel crazy, makes you want to scream just to remind yourself you're real. But perhaps the most lasting toll was what it did to my sense of worth. For years, I didn't believe I was worthy of love that didn't hurt. I didn't believe I deserved kindness without a price. I didn't even believe I had a right to be angry. I thought healing meant staying silent. That being strong meant pretending nothing ever happened. But that's not strength. That's survival. And survival is not the same as healing. Healing came later. Slowly. In pieces. But before I could even begin to move toward that, I had to face what the abuse had done to me. I had to stop minimizing it, stop explaining it away, stop pretending I was fine. I had to sit with the pain. Had to feel it. And that was terrifying. 'Cause once you open that door, there's no going back. But here's the thing. Pain doesn't disappear just because you avoid it. It festers. And eventually, it demands to be heard. So I started listening. I started acknowledging what I went through. I started learning how to feel again, even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. And that's when I began to understand that I wasn't weak for being affected. I was human. I wasn't broken. I was wounded. And wounds can heal, but only if we stop pretending they don't exist. For a long time, I didn't think healing was even possible. I thought people like me, people who'd been through what I had, just learned how to live with the damage. I thought the best I could hope for was learning how to hide it better, how to carry the weight more quietly, how to avoid the kind of pain that sneaks up when you least expect it. I thought healing belonged to other people, people who were stronger or luckier or more whole than I felt. But I was wrong. The first step was the hardest. It wasn't going to therapy. It wasn't telling someone. It wasn't even leaving that house. It was admitting to myself that what happened was real. That it mattered. That I couldn't keep locking it away and hoping it would fade. Because the truth is, the longer I kept it inside, the louder it got. I was tired. Tired of pretending, tired of smiling through pain, tired of feeling like I didn't belong in my own story. Started small. A whispered truth to a friend I trusted. Just a few sentences, barely above a whisper, like if I said it too loud it might become too real. I was bracing for disbelief, for pity, for judgment. But what I got was stillness. A hand reaching across the table. A quiet, "I'm so sorry." And for the first time in my life I felt something shift. I was still broken, still aching, but I didn't feel invisible anymore. And that mattered more than I knew. I began to speak more after that. Carefully but honestly. Every time I shared a little piece of my story, the weight got just a bit lighter. Not because the pain disappeared, but because I wasn't holding it all alone anymore. That's something I wish I could go back and tell my younger self. That there is power in speaking, even when your voice shakes. That secrets lose some of their grip when they're brought into the light. Therapy came later. I resisted it at first. I didn't want to open the box. didn't want to sit in a room and say the words out loud. But when I finally did, I was met with something I hadn't expected: validation. Someone looked me in the eye and said, "What happened to you wasn't your fault." I'd heard that sentence before, but this time I let it land. I let it reach the parts of me that still blamed myself. And little by little I started to believe it. Healing isn't neat. Doesn't follow a schedule. It's messy and non-linear and exhausting. Some days you feel like you're making progress, and other days you're right back in the middle of the storm. But every step forward matters. Every hard conversation, every journal entry, every boundary set, every night you choose to stay instead of run, that's healing. I had to learn how to rebuild a relationship with myself. That was the hardest part. 'Cause for years I hated who I was. I hated my body for not fighting harder, my voice for not screaming louder, my heart for still loving people who hurt me. But healing meant shifting those narratives. It meant learning how to forgive myself, not for what happened but for how long I punished myself afterward. It meant learning how to trust again, not just others but myself. Trusting that I could make decisions, that I could choose who got close, that I had a right to safety and love and peace. And slowly, I began to see glimpses of the girl I used to be before everything was taken. The one who laughed without looking over her shoulder. The one who dreamed. The one who believed she deserved good things. There were moments, small, almost unnoticeable at first, that told me healing was real. Like waking up without the knot in my stomach. Like hearing a loud noise and not immediately bracing for pain. Like looking in the mirror and not turning away. Like being touched, gently and respectfully, and not shrinking. Those moments mattered. They still do. And I found strength in connection. In meeting others who had their own stories, their own scars. There's something powerful about knowing you're not alone. About sitting in a room with people who don't need the whole explanation because they just get it. Because they've lived it too. There's something unspoken but undeniable about that kind of understanding. It helped me more than any textbook ever could. I won't pretend I've arrived at some perfect place. I still carry things. I still have days where I hurt. But I'm no longer living in silence. I'm no longer shrinking myself to survive. I'm no longer afraid of my own story. And that, to me, is what healing looks like. There came a point in my healing where I realized something had shifted. Not just in how I felt about the past, but in what I wanted to do with it. Because for so long all I wanted was to forget. To erase the memories, the pain, the people who failed me. I thought that was the only way to move forward. To pretend it never happened. But healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning to live with it, to hold it in your hands without letting it define you. And that's where something surprising began to grow inside me. This quiet, steady desire to speak, not just for myself but for others. When I first started sharing pieces of my story, I wasn't trying to be brave. I was just trying to breathe. I was trying to feel less alone. But what happened next was something I didn't expect. People started reaching out. Quiet messages, tearful conversations, strangers and friends alike saying, "Me too." People I never would have imagined had lived through pain of their own, opening up because someone else finally had the courage to speak first. And in those moments I began to see the power of telling the truth. Not the polished, easy version, but the raw, trembling truth that most people are too scared to say out loud. Because when we do that, when we speak honestly about what we've survived, we give permission. We open a door. We make space for others to finally say, "That happened to me too. And I've never told anyone." It's hard to describe how meaningful that is until you've been the person who thought no one could possibly understand your pain. Until you've been the one who thought your story was too ugly, too complicated, too heavy. I had carried that belief for most of my life. But once I saw what honesty could do, how it could soften someone else's shame, how it could help someone take their first step toward healing, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. Speaking out didn't mean I wasn't afraid. It didn't mean the memories didn't still sting, or that I had it all figured out. Just meant I was choosing something different. I was choosing connection over isolation. I was choosing light over shadow. I was choosing to take back the power that had been stolen from me. And the more I spoke, the more I realized how deeply this silence runs. Not just in individuals but in families, in communities, in cultures. We don't talk about abuse. We don't talk about trauma. We don't talk about what it does to a child to grow up in fear. We look the other way. We sweep it under the rug. We tell people to forgive before they've even been allowed to feel their anger. But silence protects the wrong people, keeps the pain alive and the healing out of reach. So I made a promise to myself. I would speak, even when it was uncomfortable, even when my voice shook, even when I was met with disbelief or resistance. Because for every person who didn't want to hear my story, there was someone else who needed it more than I could ever know. Someone holding their breath, waiting for someone else to go first. I wanted to be that person. I started volunteering with survivors. I started writing. I started showing up in rooms where these conversations were finally happening. Conversations that should have happened a long time ago. And with every step I felt more and more like myself. Not the scared, silent version I had been, but the version that had been buried beneath the pain. The version that was always there, waiting to be seen. That's not to say it's easy. Telling the truth comes with risk. There are people who will never understand. People who will ask questions you don't owe them answers to. People who will minimize, deflect, deny. But every time I choose to speak anyway, I feel that old shame lose just a little more of its grip. And every time someone tells me, because you spoke, I finally did too, I know it's worth it. I never wanted to be known for what was done to me. I wanted to be known for what I chose after. For the strength it took to crawl through the darkness and find something resembling light. For the courage to not just survive but to live, and to live in a way that helps others do the same. If you're listening to this and you've been holding something in your chest for years, something you thought no one would understand, I hope you know it's not too late. You don't have to carry it alone. You don't have to stay silent. Your story matters. Your voice matters. And when you're ready, I promise, there is someone who needs to hear it.